Hi everyone, this is Nick Pollock here from Roar Lions Roar. While you're here, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that alert bell so you never miss any of our new content. And if you prefer to listen instead of watch, make sure you check us out on your podcast platform of choice where you can subscribe and download each new episode. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening. Go State!
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Roar Lions Roar. I am your fill-in host this evening, Matt DeBear. I am joined by my fantastic colleague, Matt Filipovitz. How are you doing this evening, Matt?
Matt, I'm good. The Bears got destroyed today, which I'm totally fine with, and I'm starting to just welcome the fact that they are going to ruin Justin Fields, and they will inevitably draft like a horrible quarterback in the third round next year, and we will have a weird competition, and it's going to make me very angry.
How did Jaquan Brisker play today, though? That's the real question everyone tuned in to find out.
So Brisker is playing at a very high level, which is awesome. It's great. It would just be really cool if the Bears could put any points on the board. They scored a little bit more today than I expected. They dropped 29, which is perfectly fine. And Brisker ended up with, I want to say, he was second on the team with, I think it's 7 or 9 total tackles, which is a pretty good day for a defensive back. So he's playing well. So that's a win.
Well, that is, of course, like I said, the real reason everyone tuned in today to hear our thoughts on Bears-Cowboys. Secondary, everyone tuned in to hear our thoughts on number 13 Penn State falling on Saturday to number 2 Ohio State 44-31 in Beaver Stadium. We'll obviously get into it here as we go on, but it was a weird game. I've got the stats here in front of me. It's Penn State racked up 482 yards of offense, 371 yards through the air. Gave up 450 yards, 354 yards through the air. And as anyone who watched the game knows, and as we'll talk about here in a couple minutes, the real story of the game, though, was the 4 Penn State turnovers. Some really weird turnovers, as we'll talk about, too. Not exactly the type of typical interceptions that you might expect if you are a fan of football or even have watched Penn State's offense the last few years. And that's kind of really where I want to start this, Matt, is obviously we don't need to get into all the hijinks of the last 9 minutes. I'm sure it'll come up here as we talk a little bit. But I want to kind of break this down in the 3 phases: offense, defense, and special teams. And then we'll talk about kind of the biggest turning point, because boy, were there many. But I want to start with the offense, because I think it was after the way Penn State struggled so mightily in Ann Arbor against Michigan just 2 weeks ago against a very good defense in its own right. I think we were all kind of on the edge of our seat wondering what exactly this offense was going to do against statistically a better defense in what Jim Knowles and Ohio State roll out there. And like I said, they rolled up almost 500 yards of offense, 31 points, 371 yards through the air. So I guess what in general are your thoughts on how that offensive performance played out versus almost what you expected, I guess?
Yeah, I didn't expect it to play as well as it did. I liked what I saw offensively. I liked how they handled first down, and a lot of that was because of Katron Allen and Nick Singleton. Franklin has always said he's been obsessed with keeping the offense on track. I saw, I think, a lot of 4-yard runs on first down, 5-yard runs on first down, which was really what this offense is needed to get going. And there were a lot of well-sustained drives, I thought, and they were set up really well on first down. And then Parker Washington, I think, may have just played his way out of college football next year. I thought he played the best game of his career, and if he goes pro after this year, after doing that to Ohio State, I cannot blame the guy. That was one of the more impressive performances I've seen from a Penn State wide receiver over the past 2 seasons, even including everything Jahan ever did. I thought the tight ends were used really well. Theo Johnson had a pretty good game, that great catch down the sideline that Cliff did a great job keeping his eyes downfield on. And then Tyler Warren splitting a converted high school quarterback, out wide in one-on-one coverage and trusting him to make a play says a lot about what the staff thinks about what is essentially their third string tight end. So there's a lot I liked. And I know, we're probably going to get into it sooner or later. I didn't like a lot of what I saw out of Sean Clifford. He was really good for 85% of the game. If you want to beat Ohio State, you have to be really good for 95% of the game. And those 4 turnovers, excuse me, probably weren't all on him. But I know you and I discussed this a little bit yesterday, and my line has always been year 6. It's year 6. You cannot commit 4 turnovers in the biggest game you were brought back in year 6 to win. You cannot commit 4 turnovers in that game. I know there's context behind it. I know there's a lot of other things that went wrong, but the fact that we're sitting here talking about Sean Clifford played a really good game that he threw 3 interceptions in says a lot about the Sean Clifford experience. And I've said it before, I'm kind of ready to move on. I don't think we're going to. I mean, 10-2 would still exceed my expectations, and Clifford probably gives him the best shot to still get there. But, it's still going to come back to, Sean Clifford, really, really good 85% game. And it's a bummer that it couldn't have been more.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of, it really is the story of the offense. You hit on, Katron Allen and Nick Singleton on first down were really good. Joel Klatt drove that point home ad nauseum during the game. But they were consistently picking up 3, 4, 5, 6 yards on first down, which I think is one of the reasons why, if you can do this, interceptions aside, Sean Clifford was really effective. He wasn't in a position very often where they were relying on him to convert a big third down. They did convert a few of them. I have the numbers here in front of me. They were, I thought I had them here in front of me. Yeah, they were 6 of 16 on third down. Not crazy, but certainly probably better than where they were going into the game, it feels like. We'll talk about this here in a second. Defensively, they were really good against Ohio State on third down, really up until the fourth quarter, which is kind of its own discussion point on its own. Yeah. But the running backs were really good. Parker Washington was really good. Keandre Lambert-Smith had obviously the big touchdown catch, also had the big catch and run. It was kind of in garbage time, but you saw, I think, kind of flashes of what he is. Theo Johnson had the big catch that set up the first Penn State touchdown. There was so much good on the offense. They did a really good job, I thought, for the most part, protecting Sean Clifford when he dropped back to pass as an offensive line. Obviously not perfect, but they were going against arguably one of the best pass rushes in the country.
Only 3 sacks allowed against that defensive line is impressive.
Absolutely. And it's you were talking about all these good things, and then we come back to the 4 turnovers, all of which revolve around Sean Clifford. And I want to talk about them kind of individually because they're all they're weird. Like I was saying earlier, the first one, really 2 of them are kind of the same. The first interception was the deflected pass that Zach Harrison came up with. And then the third interception was I'm not even going to try and say his name. They said it enough on the broadcast yesterday. I still don't know how to say it. JTT, the defensive end that just, might have won himself an award or 2 on the base of what he did on Saturday. But those 2 plays, those 2 interceptions were, I almost want to say no read plays. It's a play where I imagine either that the end is designed to become a free rusher so that tackle gets out and blocks, or you want to chip him so he isn't able to do that. So to say that it's a different kind of interception to me because it is, it's kind of take the snap and react. You're throwing the ball as design play to this receiver. You're not really making a read. But especially after the first one, and I think there might have been another play later in the game where they ran a similar play and it got deflected. You kind of wonder, do you need to be aware of that? Mm-hmm. The third, the third that we're going to talk about was the third down play where, again, it was JTT makes the unbelievable play as a defensive end, mind you, in coverage. But it seemed like there was a little bit of miscommunication there between Allen, the freshman running back, and Clifford. Not that you're ever going to get an explanation on that, but the reaction of both players kind of alluded to there was some confusion about what each expected to happen on that play. So I say all that because it's, we talk about, the interception against Purdue, that was just, a bad throw. The first one certainly is just, a fluke play to flex, kind of like the Penn State interception against Michigan. But then you look at, and I think you mentioned this, Matt, there were a handful of plays where he got away with one. There was one, when it was still a ball game in the second half, throwing back against his body where it got deflected, I think twice. There was another play like that. But that happens. CJ Stroud got away with a couple, including one where Zakee Wheatley came down with it and just was maybe an inch or two out of bounds. So, if it's a results business, and certainly the 3 interceptions are the results. But it's a hard time holding against plays that didn't go against him, holding those against him. So, it certainly is the story of the game. But it just doesn't feel like he played that badly. And like you said, and I said this with Nick last week, previewing the game, unless you're an Alabama or a Georgia or Clemson, these teams that have run with and competed with Ohio State consistently over the last half dozen years or more, you have to be just about perfect to beat them. And Penn State was, you said 85%, a solid B performance on offense, and that's with 4 turnovers. Yeah. I guess my question to you is, and you kind of alluded to this, and this, I'm jumping forward here a little bit, what we want to talk about. I guess, where do you go from here on offense at quarterback? Because obviously the Big Ten championship, barring some unforeseen disaster with Michigan and Ohio State, is out of the question. You're certainly not in playoff contention at this point with 2 losses. So where do you go first as an offense? Because they did a lot of good things, like we said, but quarterback's the $1 million question. So I guess let's tear that Band-Aid off right now.
Yeah, I kind of said it earlier, and I may have misspoke. I don't exactly remember what I said like 5 minutes ago. It's a miracle I remember what's happening right now. They're going to stick with Clifford because I think the staff believes he gives them the best shot to get to 10 wins, and they might be right. And I think 10 wins is important to judge the health of a college football program. But at the same time, not all 10-win seasons are created equal. And when we look back, the best win, assuming they get to 10, is going to be what? At Purdue or home against Maryland, Matt, if they get to 10?
Yeah.
What's that worth? I don't know if that's really worth a lot in terms of the health of your program. So I described Penn State a couple weeks ago as a window program, in that if they're ever going to break through and make the playoff under its current format, it's going to be in a window year. 3 and 4 are going to be window years based upon the talent we're seeing. And I think the staff knows that. If you look at the way they're handling true freshmen, they're getting guys on the field early. Like, I think it's 7 or 8 dudes have already burned their red shirt with a whole month to go on the season. I think that number is kind of locked in now. As we get into November, I don't see anyone else burning a red shirt, barring injury. This is a long-winded way to say, I think you have to pass the sticks to number 15. I think you can win 3 of these 4 with Drew Allar and with the running game evolving like it has been. And you can probably go 4 for 4. And that prepares Allar, this offense, these pass catchers, this offensive line, for the window year that we're expecting to have coming up. So, I hate to do it to Sean Clifford. Like, I really wanted the guy to be successful, but we're talking about a 4-year career that's going to feature a really good 10-2 regular season, a COVID year, which I'll throw out, an underwhelming 7-5 year where he got hurt, and then this year. So throughout the entirety of his career, his best win is probably going to be 2019 against Iowa, and that's just not enough to cut it, I think, to keep the 5-star true freshman on the bench. So I know we're probably going to differ here on our opinion, but I think it's time to just go out there and say, all right, let's see what we have in Drew Allar, and let's see what he excels at. And then we have all offseason to either, build our offense around that, or maybe adjust things based upon what he can do well when the lights are on. So I think it's time to make the switch.
And I'm going to disagree with you, but I'm not going to say that you're wrong. I think this is certainly a matter of opinion. My whole philosophy, I guess, on that sort of decision has always been that, one, your goal as the head coach at Penn State is to win football games.
Yep. And
to your point, with at Indiana, home against Maryland, at Rutgers, home against Michigan State to close out the year, those are 4 games that I think, to be perfectly blunt, they could probably win with Christian Veilleux at quarterback. Yeah. But we're obviously not the ones that are there at practice every day. We've seen I don't even know how many passes Drew Allar's thrown this year, but we'll say 50 maybe that he's thrown at most in the time that he's had.
I want to say it's 23, but I could be wrong.
Okay, so I was way off, which is not unheard of. And so I've always deferred to, and this is why we're fans. This is why we have this podcast. This is why we, tweet dumb things on Twitter during the games and during the week. But I trust that James Franklin and Mike Yurcich and the offensive coaching staff that see these guys every day, and in Drew Allar's case, know what he was as a talent coming in, where he's at in his development, know what the right move is to not only develop him, but prepare the team for 2023, 2024. Because I think if we expect those years to go like they are, Drew Allar's in the NFL draft in 2025.
Right.
But I go back to James Franklin, and the entire coaching staff has to look the 85 scholarship players, however many walk-ons they have, in the eye and make that decision. Obviously, Sean Clifford's a very popular guy in that locker room. He's been elected captain, I think, 16 times now in his illustrious career. But it's different than the NFL, where you're, we know we're going to go 4-12 this year. I guess 4-13. You play 17 games now. We know we're not going to have a good year. We know that the guys in the locker room, our fans, all know that this is a rebuilding process. College football is just different than that. These guys, a lot of these guys, when they play their last game for Penn State, that's their last game playing football, and they want to win as much as they can. They want to have as much success as they can. So it's. I mean, there's a reason the guy makes $7.5 million a year, right, and his coaching staff makes however much it is total. They get they make a lot of money to make those sorts of calls, but I guess I defer to, maybe this is overly myopic on my part, that they know what is best for Drew Allar. They know what's best for the 2022 Penn State football team. They know what's best for the Penn State football program as a whole. Right. I agree with you. I don't think they're going to make the change. I think we might see more of Drew Allar earlier in games. Hopefully, they're able to put up numbers where they feel more comfortable putting him in lower stress situations like they've done up to this point. But I wouldn't, be, angrily tweeting or shaking my fist in frustration if Drew Allar gets the start on Saturday against Indiana. Like I said, I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think either of us really expect that to happen. But I don't think at this point, from what we know, the evidence we have of the whole picture, I don't think it is, all of a sudden you do that, they're going 2-2 down the stretch. They could, but I think, given the talent of what they're facing down the road, that's not really in the cards, regardless of who's at quarterback. Like I said, we'll have plenty of time to talk offense. We've got 4 more games this year. This is a fascinating question to me, or not question, but topic, is the defensive performance against Ohio State on Saturday. Because you look at the numbers: 450 yards against, 354 yards passing for CJ Stroud. They didn't force a turnover. They did get the fumble at the end of the first half that killed the Ohio State scoring drive there, and then a weird series of events down the stretch there. They held Ohio State to 98 yards rushing.
Insane.
Almost half of that came on one play. But then you look at the totality of it. They gave up, we'll say, 37 points. You take out the pick 6 late in the game. So it's, by the numbers, not a great performance, but it felt like they played really well. They just got, offense versus Penn State offense versus Ohio State defense. We saw the 5-star former number 2 player in the country just take over the game. I think that's a lot of what we saw with Ohio State's offense against the Nittany Lion defense. Is I don't think he was a 5-star, but high 4-star CJ Stroud, doing what he does. Travion Henderson, a 5-star running back, breaks the big play when they needed it. Part of that drive that had Ohio State take the lead in just 35 seconds after Penn State went up 21-16. And then I think obviously the one that everyone knows is Marvin Harrison Jr., who just, gets better and better every time he goes out and just took over that game. And you can nitpick individual plays. There was the 3rd down play where they brought pressure and played off of them, and it was an easy pass and catch. Once Abdul Carter missed the batting it down at the line of scrimmage. Right. But I think, to me at least, a lot of it felt like 5-star elite level skill players doing what they do behind a really, really good offensive line that neutralized Chop Robinson, Adisa Isaac, and PJ Mustipher for long stretches of the game.
Yeah, that was going to be my big thing I hit on. Penn State had 2 sacks in this game, and not one of them was from a defensive lineman. It was from Johnny Dixon on a really well-designed corner blitz, I thought. I loved that play. That was big boy ball, I thought, from Manny Diaz there. And then Abdul Carter, who I'm starting to think is the best player on Penn State's defense. That may be bold to say because I think really highly of PJ Mustipher. Abdul's really good for a true freshman. It's Micah Parsons level for me at this point, especially with how many snaps he's playing. I really like what they have at number 11. But you're right. Manny Diaz can coach football. It's abundantly clear. I don't think he's going to go get a head coaching job just yet. I think Penn State may have another year with him. And I'm curious to see if they can go out there and find a pass rush this offseason, what this defense can evolve into. But this showed that he knows how to coach the secondary really well. Stroud's going to pick apart everybody. Harrison, Emeke, how do you say his last name? Abuka. Julian Fleming, the tight end whose name's escaping me. Those dudes are always going to get open. Like, there's just too many guys to keep track of. So I really do think they did an overall a really good job. I thought Keziah Izzard played a great game. I thought Elsdon played a lot better. So there's definitely talent there, and Diaz really did about as good a job as I think anybody's going to do of holding that offense in check. And I think the number is a bit misleading in terms of points allowed, just in the fact that, again, one was a pick 6, and then they had, short field a lot of the time, just because of the nature of the 4 turnover game from the offense. So I think Diaz maybe lost some popularity after what happened against Michigan, but I know Bill made the point that Franklin has built this roster to compete with Ohio State, and I think we saw that kind of come to fruition here this week. So well done by Diaz, well done by the defense. It's a bummer they couldn't get a turnover or a little bit more sacks, but in terms of non-explosive play, I thought they were about as good as anybody could ask for.
Yeah, I've got the stats here in front of me, and I was kind of trying to refresh my memory here. And I was having the conversation with someone on, I guess it was Saturday night after the game, that Ohio State, especially when you look at the passing game, that okay, you can take away Marvin Harrison Jr., which everyone knows who he is and knows how good he is, and he still got 10 catches for 185 yards. You can take away Cade Stover, the tight end. You can take away Emeka Abuka. You can take away Fleming. You can take away Henderson, which they did for 98% of the game, really. But they've got another guy. Every time you take away one guy, they've got someone else to go to. And then thank God they didn't have Jackson Smith and Jigba, who, if it's not Marvin Harrison, he might be the most talented wide receiver in college football. Mm-hmm. It's this wave of talent after, over and over again. You take one guy away, someone else steps up. And that's true on both sides of the ball, really. I was looking at the rosters earlier today, and I know I shared this in our Slack, Matt, but you look at the top of the roster is pretty even, but then you keep going down. And I think it was the first almost 50 players I looked at on Ohio State's roster are 4-star and higher. And a lot of them are high-level 4-stars. You get down to player 45, 46, 47 on Penn State's roster. They're good players, but they're, the star level reflects the talent, and the depth of that talent is just absurd. And then you look at the classes of some of those guys. You've got sophomores, juniors, seniors that are that talented, that have had time to physically mature, have experience in the program, played in hostile road environments like they saw yesterday. I think every year when we see this game, you really see what the difference between Penn State's obviously recruited really, really well, but then you see what that next level is, where Penn State is desperately trying to get to, or really everyone in college football, save for a few programs, is trying to get to. And you just see, I think that's really what it is. Penn State played really well for 55 minutes of the game. There was that 4-minute stretch with the pick 6 and the strip sack and kind of where it got away from them there. But they played really, really well for 55 minutes, and they lost by 13 points. And that's as well, other than Notre Dame in the first game of the year, that's as well as anyone's played Ohio State all season. And I might hazard a guess, depending on what they do against Michigan, probably will be. And then, depending on who they face in the postseason and things like that.
Right.
it's a unique question just because Penn State's a really talented football team. They're going to hopefully win 10 games because they're a really talented football team. But Ohio State's in their division every year, and Ohio State's always like this. Yep. In the last couple of years, Michigan's been at that level. And I found myself saying a lot in the last couple of weeks that it was 24 months ago or less than that people wanted to run Jim Harbaugh out of Ann Arbor. They couldn't get him out of there fast enough. And he went to the playoff a year ago, and he certainly looks like he has a team capable of doing it again. That it switches so fast. It does. For that level right below the elite teams, I think. And I think that's where Penn State, I think, if this last 4 weeks play out the way we think they will, is going to kind of reestablish itself, hopefully, as a program kind of in that tier where, as, these young players that you were mentioning earlier, mature and get more experience, and they supplement that with more talent coming into the program, whether it be through high school recruiting or transfers, can do what we've seen Michigan do the last couple of years when it looked like things were going really sideways for them. The last thing I want to talk about with this game in particular is I mentioned special teams. I think we can cover that pretty quickly. In a game where you have to be really, really good on special teams, Penn State just wasn't. They didn't punt the ball typically well. No. They had a kickoff go out of bounds. Yep. Jake Pinniger technically missed 2 field goals that didn't count. Yep. Then makes the 45-yarder. But then you see Ohio State pounding the ball out the back of the end zone. Their punter averaged, I had it right here in front of me a second ago, 52 yards a kick. Those little things add up again in a game where you have to be really, really good. This was a question that I've been debating with different groups of friends in the last 24 hours or so. Where do you think this game turned? Because it was a weird game, lots of back and forth. And I'm not a huge believer in momentum, but it felt like something switched. And it's easy to say, the turnover or the strip sack. But it felt to me like, and I'm curious to what your thoughts were, that it was not even the big Travion Henderson 40-yard touchdown run that took the lead back so quickly. I thought it was that first play, the crowd's going bonkers. Penn State's up 21-16. There's 9 minutes left in the game. They're not backed up, but they're down in front of the student section. And they come out, and C.J. Stroud throws a dart to Marvin Harrison for 20 yards or whatever it was on first down. They go tempo, and it was like that the crowd just kind of went out of it. I'm curious if you agree, if there was another moment that you thought things kind of started to get away or not.
I mean, it's hard to say because the game felt like it was going to get out of reach for Penn State really early with those bad turnovers to start things off. And then Penn State kind of brought it back, and I always felt they were on borrowed time. And eventually the time ran out, and I think it was 3-play, 76-yard drive. Is that what it ended up being?
Something along. I know it was 35 seconds because I've been reminding a couple people of that all day because it's astonishing how quickly it happened.
Yeah. I don't know if there's a set play. Again, I think they were always kind of on borrowed time from the way it started. I mean, you do not turn it over 2 times. What were their first 3 drives? Was it two interceptions and a 3-and-out, or 2 interceptions and 1
5
first
and
down
out?
And then a punt?
They got the 1 first down, then punted.
Okay, and a 5-and-out. You're not coming back from that against that level of team. Like, you're just not. So it always kind of felt like it was on borrowed time. So it's hard for me to point to an exact moment, but I think that's a really fair one. And it was especially frustrating because that drive that preceded that for Penn State went on for seemingly 9 years. That was the longest drive of my life, with the 4th down conversion, with the missed field goal penalty, 4th down. That drive went on forever. So the defense should have been rested. And to watch that not even matter, I think was incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, I'm going to pull it up. So it was, it was a 75-yard drive. So they had the touchback. Pinniger just, I saw Sean Fitz tweeted after this happened. So I see we're going with the kick the ball really hard strategy from now on, or something to that effect. Yeah. So it was C.J. Stroud to Marvin Harrison for 21 yards. They go tempo, and then Stroud hits Ibuka for 13 yards. And then the next play is the Travion Henderson 41-yard touchdown pass, touchdown run, I should say. So I don't want to say that's the last of the Ohio State talks. I'm sure we'll get into it here as we talk about kind of the big picture looking forward. But I do want to take a second to thank our wonderful sponsors, Home Field Apparel. I am not wearing home field today. All mine is in the wash. I have not done laundry for about 2 weeks, and it has caught up with me.
Nice.
But faithful listeners know that the wonderful folks at Home Field Apparel allow us to talk nonsense about Penn State football and Penn State athletics. You will hear basketball on this podcast here coming up now that the season is
hoops
right around the
week,
corner.
Baby. Penn State basketball next week. Catch the fever.
Real quick aside, the Nittany Lion basketball team apparently won a close scrimmage against George Mason. I believe George Mason or George Washington, one of the Georges, in preparation for the season. So we will have Penn State basketball talk, like I said here, as we get into the season. But as you know, Home Field allows us to do this. On your first order, please use code ROARLIONSROAR for 15% off that order. Wonderful shirts, wonderful people. Like I said, we would not be able to do what we're doing. Maybe that is reason not to do this, but you're listening, so clearly something resonates with you. So please support our friends over there. If it is your first order, use the promo code when you check out, and they will give you 15% off that order.
I saw more than a few home field shirts at the bar I was at for the game. I think I maybe saw 4 of them. I saw somebody in the T-shirt version of the Take Me to Happy Valley. I own that in the crew neck form. And I rocked the white, or I guess the eggshell kind of color Nittany Lion logo that looks like the Lion Shrine. That's one of my favorite shirts.
I wore that one. I was at the Minnesota game for homecoming last weekend, and that was my tailgate shirt. Because any faithful whiteout attendee knows you do not wear your primary whiteout gear during the tailgate because you are going to spill something on yourself, especially with it being a night game. So I had, I think my entire attire that weekend on the drive over was the Take Me to Happy Valley t-shirt because nice. I'm very on brand, if nothing else. Then the eggshell kind of grayish heather gray Penn State shirt on Saturday while tailgating, and then the We Are shirt on the drive back home on Sunday. So great shirts. I now own a Northern Michigan University home field shirt as well as a University of Hawaii t-shirt. Nice. Go Bows. I know they are struggling this year, but my Rainbows will be back. So moving on to kind of the second topic I wanted to hit on, which will inevitably bring up topics from Saturday's game. But we've made it through kind of the brunt of the schedule at Michigan, home against Minnesota, which ended up being a little bit of a letdown with Tanner Morgan out and Mo Ibrahim clearly not 100%. And then hosting Ohio State. Through that stretch 1-2, 6-2 on the season. I believe they are number 16 in each poll now. The college football rankings come out on Tuesday this week, the first iteration of those this season. Mm-hmm. And now it's a chance, at least as fans, to exhale a little bit with at Indiana, home against Maryland, at Rutgers, and the land-grant trophy game against Michigan State on senior day to wrap up the regular season. Like we mentioned earlier, and I think we're in agreement, and I think a huge portion of the fan base is probably in agreement that this should be a 4-0 stretch. This Indiana game, I'm going to be honest with you, terrifies me on Saturday. I'm beyond grateful that it is a 2:30 game. And it has nothing to do with this year's Indiana team. I think they've got a solid defense. Their offense is nothing. I don't even have the rankings in front of me, but they're down in the 80s, I think, overall in SP+, which I know is kind of our go-to ranking system to kind of judge what our expectations are for the quality of opponent and whatnot. But weird things happen in Bloomington. Thank God this is a 2:30. I don't even know if it's 2:30 or 3:30. It's an afternoon kick. It's not the early game. But I mentioned this previewing the Minnesota game with, I think it was Nick and I, that the post-loss James Franklin narrative I thought was going to get a huge boost from what on paper is a pretty good Minnesota team. Primetime game, whiteout, homecoming. I think there was a lot of things that kind of came together to help get a team full of college age students up for that game.
Right.
2:30, 3:30, whatever time it is, in probably a 2/3, if we're lucky, full Memorial Stadium in Bloomington against a not good Indiana team. Not that I think they're going to lose, because I think a lot of things would have to go really wrong for that to happen. But this is the kind of game where to be overly dramatic, kind of creates that 2021 Illinois game situation where it's a team that doesn't look very good, coming off an emotional loss, but you played pretty well. You put a lot into that game, obviously, and now you got to get up again 7 days later for a team that's not very good in an environment that's not going to be very energetic, we'll say. Right. My general thought is if you get through Saturday, kind of get through that post-loss malaise, get the win out of your system, kind of play through it. It's kind of like that recovery from a cold, where you don't feel great for a couple of days, but you got to get back into the grind. If you can get through this week, get through Saturday, then I feel really, really confident about what's coming. I think they can handle Maryland. That's a scary offense, but you get them at home. What Maryland does really well, Penn State defends really well with the secondary. And the Maryland defense just is not very good. And I think Penn State has, certainly with the running game, figured some stuff out that I think has allowed them to, whether it's Drew Allar or Sean Clifford or whoever, take some pressure off the quarterback position. It's not all on that guy's arm. Rutgers is just terrible. Decent defense, offense that I think is one of the worst in college football. And then I have no idea what kind of Michigan State team we're going to get at the end of the year. That's going to be a weird environment. It's not going to be a terribly full Beaver Stadium, I imagine.
The vibes around Michigan State right now are not great, though. I don't know if you saw the video of the tunnel situation. Yeah,
I want to talk about this in a minute because I included a Big Ten recap on our talking points today because I really want to talk about that for a host of reasons. But that's a team that Michigan kind of played with their food a little bit, and who knows where they're going to be. They're, I think, at 3-5 on the year. They can afford one more loss and still maintain bowl eligibility. I don't know what their schedule looks like the rest of the year, other than obviously at Penn State to finish the year. But it feels like
they have Illinois yet too. I think
that's actually this weekend. Now that you mention it, but I think in the big picture, my expectations are you go 4-0, you finish 10-2. You're either going to the Citrus Bowl as the top non-New Year's Six game. Or probably more than likely, unless Illinois goes on a run here to end the season, you're probably the third Big Ten New Year's Six / college football playoff representative, along with Ohio State and Michigan. Which, if you told me that 10 weeks ago when we were previewing the season, I would have signed up for that in a heartbeat. I know you mentioned earlier, like the schedule is not what it seemed like it was going into the year. You don't have that signature win, but 10 wins is 10 wins. This program has not achieved 10 wins very often. In certainly not the last 2 years, and before the 2016 season really hadn't done it a whole lot with any level of consistency either. So I think regardless of who you beat to get there, it's 10 wins.
It would match the best regular season record under Franklin.
Yeah, I'm going through all these talking points in my head that you read about. You win the games you're supposed to win, and try and beat Ohio State and Michigan. Well, they're going to win the game. If they do that, they're going to have won the games they're supposed to win. They'll have won the games they were favored in. They'll have lost the 2 games they were not favored in to teams that are quite frankly just better than them at this point. So big picture, 4-0, right off into the sunset with Sean Clifford, a senior class that has been through a heck of a lot on and off the field with the COVID circumstances and all that stuff. But I really want to see, and I think we will, whether it's Drew Allar or the rest of the freshman class, see those guys continue to take on bigger roles. I want to see either some guys, some of those freshmen that have games left to play to maintain their red shirts. I'd love to see them working a little bit. I just kind of want to see kind of this transition, whether that's getting those guys more meaningful reps and kind of starting to see where this offense has started to evolve to, I think, if that makes sense.
Yeah. The obsession for the next 4 weeks have to be preparing for 2023. That's what everything has to come down to. Obviously, you want to send these seniors and these players going pro and on a high note. I think you can give them their reps and get these freshmen, sophomores, redshirt sophomores, a ton of run at the same time. So they should go 4-0, and I will gladly take 10-2 since I said 9-3 this year. But again, the entire obsession with this now has to be getting guys ready to become impact players moving forward. And that's finding your next go-to receiver if Parker Washington leaves, The entire offensive line, in theory, could come back. I don't know about, especially Scruggs, Norzad, and Olu, but I know Olu was banged up after Ohio State, so I hope he's able to give a go and really find out what his NFL stock is worth. But I want to see if Norzad maybe gets some run at center. I think he's a guy who could come back for the extra year, just because he's only had 1 year at this level. And I thought Norzad played really well on Saturday. I don't know about you, Matt. I was really impressed with Hunter Norzad. And I think
for sure,
Tengwall has the guard spot. Yeah, I think Tengwall has the guard spot locked up moving forward. So I want to see if Norzad maybe is the center of the future. I'd like to see Vega Awane get some run. I think right tackle is just really interesting. I think Wallace is hurt. Effner is what he is. Drew Shelton has games to play, and I was reading in a couple reports that looked like he's starting to play a little bit of right tackle on top of left tackle. So I don't know what that means, but there's a lot of interesting storylines. And again, I don't think the point of college football is to win national titles. If it was, Alabama and Kent State wouldn't be playing on the same level in name only, I guess. So there's still so much for me to play for and so much to watch. And I'm just excited to see kind of a shift in how this team is being managed.
Yeah, I think you touched on something that made me think of a topic I've found myself discussing more and more recently, because it's been the topic of Penn State football for seems like half a decade now, at least, is the offensive line. And I think what's really encouraging, hopefully, I'm going to qualify this as strongly as I can, that this is Phil Troutwine's third season. That first year with COVID, he probably got dealt the worst hand of any assistant football coach in the country with the timing of everything, both on and off the field. So you almost throw that out, both from a recruiting and on-field perspective. But now in his third/second year, you're starting to see, especially with guys that he brought in. And I know Olu Fashanu wasn't a guy that he brought in, but he recruited him heavily at Boston College. Salim Wormley, not a guy that he recruited to Penn State, but he recruited heavily at Boston College. Landon Tengwall, a guy that he brought in. Hunter Norzad, a guy that he brought in. Then you obviously look at the recruiting with Javen Williams and Alex Birchmeyer coming in as freshmen next year to supplement some of these guys that are coming in. I would have to imagine they're looking at the portal again to even just add some depth, because it's such a weird position where you have the guys that are older and physically mature and experienced, and there's a big gap to guys that haven't played at all and probably aren't physically ready to play at all. And you don't have that natural depth that you might have at other positions. But I want to see you mentioned Ione. I hope I'm saying that right. The block went viral among Penn State Twitter after the Minnesota game, where he just destroyed that poor kid. And I want to see guys like that are guys that Troutwine has brought in, that he identified, that are what he wants in prospects. I hope we continue to see that growth, whether it's with Ione, Drew Shelton, JB Nelson. I'm not sure how much he's really played this year. But kind of this next wave of guys that are Phil Troutwine recruits or transfers, getting that experience. Because the offensive line is by no means great. I'm not trying to sugarcoat it that way. But when you look at how clean they've largely kept Sean Clifford this year, and how much better the run game is, obviously a huge part of that is attributed to Kaytron Allen and Nicholas Singleton. But the 5-alarm grease fire that it has been the last couple of years seems to have been put out, at least. And they're showing signs of progress. They were pretty good against Ohio State. JTT just took over the game at times. I thought they did a really good job on Zach Harrison. I'm blanking on the defensive tackle that has just had a monster year for Ohio State.
His last name is Hall, I think.
Yeah, Mike Hall, I believe. So they've done a really good job there. The Michigan game, I don't know if you throw that out because it was so bad, or if that's just a bad matchup or what, but Ohio State's defensive front and their defense as a whole has put up big numbers all year, and they moved the ball pretty consistently against them. So I am hopeful that is a sign of both Phil Troutwine kind of getting his guys and his system in there, and Mike Yursich adapting more as a play caller, figuring out what he has, and continuing to evolve and figure out what works and what doesn't work. So we will, of course, talk more and more about that as the last month of the regular season goes on here. But I mentioned it a second ago. I want to get into the Big Ten very briefly, just because I want to laugh about this. This is one of my favorite parts about doing podcasts, is either the Big Ten previews or the Big Ten recaps that we've done. This week was kind of dull, save for one other game. Illinois knocked off Nebraska 26-9. It wasn't that close. Minnesota shut out Rutgers 31-0. Tanner Morgan was back. I think he threw for like 120 yards or something. Classic Minnesota game. Iowa beat Northwestern, who is just absolutely terrible. I wish we had them on the schedule this year instead of, Penn State always seems to draw they're, I guess, avoiding Illinois this year, so that's the silver lining. But
yeah,
you alluded to this, Matt. The Michigan State game. I was still awake when this started to break last night. I think it was after midnight Eastern time. As most of you know, I live in Michigan. My wife is a huge Michigan State fan. She went to bed in the third quarter because she had had enough. I stayed up because I wanted to see what might happen. And if you did stay up late or you've been on social media at all in the last 24 hours, you have seen that exactly what James Franklin predicted would happen 14 days ago after the Penn State-Michigan, I don't know, confrontation, we'll call it, in the tunnel. Someone threw a sandwich, maybe. This was a little bit more, at least the video that's come out has been much more violent, dramatic, not great for Michigan State by any means. But 8 or 9, at least, Michigan State players ganged up on a Michigan player. I'm not sure who the specific guys involved were. And I both Jim Harbaugh and Warren Manuel, the Michigan AD, referred to it as an assault. And I guess if you look at it that way and you take out the context of football, it really was. It was 9 or 10 guys beating the crap out of someone, which is obviously terrible. Mel Tucker and the Michigan State administration have basically said, the police are involved in this. They will take swift, decisive action once, those investigations are complete, I guess. But what I find, I guess, funny about this, ironic, whatever word you want to use, James Franklin took a whole lot of crap, including from Jim Harbaugh, about bringing up the fact. I didn't, and maybe I'm being a homer here. Did you think anything James Franklin said about the tunnel situation at Michigan was whining or complaining?
So I missed a lot of this. Like, somehow, for how online I am in the Penn State world, I missed, I think you were the one who told me about the sandwich situation, because I'd never heard of this until maybe 4 days later. Listen, it sucks. It's a bunch of nonsense at the end of the day, and I hope that the players involved, receive some sort of punishment for this. But Franklin is definitely vindicated. Franklin is a guy who obsesses over the little things, and I think before the little things become big things, they're kind of silly and fun to make fun of. But Franklin was right about this one. That tunnel situation is not great.
Well, it's 2 straight games. Michigan was off the week after the Penn State game, and all Franklin said, and again, maybe I'm looking at this with blue and white colored glasses, was that the Big Ten needs to do something about this before something bad happens. Something bad just happened. There was talk, I think one of the kids might have broken a nose or something. Yeah. Obviously not great. Mm-hmm. And he wasn't saying this is why we lost. He wasn't saying, this was horrible sportsmanship. He basically said the Big Ten needs to address this before something worse than what we went through happens. This is now 3 straight major games. I think it was halftime of the Ohio State-Michigan game a year ago. Something similar happened, more along the lines of what happened in the Penn State game. I've been going to games at Michigan Stadium since I was 4 years old, 5 years old probably. And it's a unique environment. It's the only place on the planet, in the college football planet at least, where the teams share a tunnel. And I have to think this is not a recent development going back to November of last year in the Ohio State game. It's just amazing to me that this has become all of a sudden, this major topic because James Franklin had the audacity to mention it. If Ryan Day mentioned it, if Kirk Ferentz mentions it, if Mel Tucker mentions it, it's not nearly the story it becomes because it's James Franklin. Mm-hmm. For whatever reason, anytime he opens his mouth and opines on anything in the college football world, he's taking grief from it. And when it involves Michigan, it gets magnified several times over. So yeah. I'm glad we brought that up. I don't know if we really discussed it, but I really wanted to just vent about that for a little bit because it was fascinating to me and hilarious to me that it took all of one more football game for the worst thing to happen that James Franklin alluded to actually happen. Right. So we'll be back later this week previewing the Indiana game. I know Nick's been really involved. We've had Tommy Stevens on recently. Go back and check out the archives on that. Really cool interview with the former Penn State quarterback, now playing in the CFL. Caught up with Ryan Snyder of Blue White Illustrated, the On3 site for Penn State, last week to talk recruiting and the, I think, 7,000 visitors who were on hand for the Minnesota game at the Whiteout. Check out Ryan's work at On3, by the way. They've had some great recaps from just the Ohio State game yesterday and some of the kids that were on campus then. But certainly subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify. Hit the alert bell on YouTube if you follow us there. Sorry you have to look at us. Sorry I keep looking off over this way. It's kind of what I do when I talk for some reason. But thank you for listening. Matt, any final thoughts before we call tonight?
I think we got at least one Hoops pod coming later in the week. Get ready. Penn State basketball year 2, Micah Shrewsbury. Matt, are you familiar with Ken Pomeroy, I'm assuming, correct?
Oh, I am very familiar. His ranking system has, how can I put this delicately, won me some money.
Okay. Do you know what Penn State is currently ranked in Ken Pom in the preseason?
I want to say it's in the 50s.
It's in the 40s. This is a top 50 Ken Pom team heading into the season. They opened the year with mighty Winthrop on the 7th of November.
Oh, the Eagles, perennial NCAA team, Winthrop.
Are they the
they
Eagles?
Seem to always show up in my bracket as like a 15 or 16 seed.
That's true. And then they host Loyola, Maryland, who I believe are the Greyhounds, where my sister went to grad school. So it's a Filipovitz family, I guess, head-to-head matchup there on that front, even though my sister's a Penn State alum as well. So
we'll have Vincent, who wrote for the site covering basketball last year, really knows his stuff. Will be joining some combination of us to talk Penn State hoops as we preview year 2 of the Shrewsbury era. But like I said, we will be back later this week to talk Indiana. Apparently Penn State basketball, because the season is right around the corner. I can't believe it. That means it's almost November. Happy Halloween. Eat plenty of candy. Thanks for listening. We will see you soon. Go State.
Go State.